here today with Simeon. Simeon serves with the Baptist Union of Wales. It's great to have you with us virtually.
Yeah.
Do you want to introduce yourself and your role and what keeps you occupied?
Yeah, good to see you, Hayley. Thanks for the invite. Yeah, my name's Simeon. As you said, I work for the Baptist Union of Wales, and kind of my role with them at the moment for the last 8 years has been as Director of Mission. So it's kind of a big title, but I've come to find that titles don't mean a huge amount unless you're actually doing something. So we're really just trying to connect with churches across Wales, and that's kind of really where all our churches are, although strangely enough we have one in Birmingham and one in London, but I won't go into why we've got a couple there, but some historic reasons. So there's about 350 churches, and they stretch from sort of Anglesey to Pembroke to Gwent and everywhere in between really, but they're bilingual as well, so that's another feature where Welsh is a heart language. We'll find churches that are only Welsh language, some are bilingual, and obviously some are just English speaking.
Brilliant, thank you. So looking at your role, obviously with mission within the Baptist Union of Wales, you obviously visit a lot of churches, see a lot of things. What are you sensing God is saying or doing within the churches that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, it takes a while, I think, to get your bearings when you're looking around churches. I was a local pastor for over 20 years now in London, before coming back to Wales in 98. And then, so I was in Cardiff for about 14 years as a pastor. And I think very much my view of church was kind of through a very much a suburban lens, and you know, good, solid church life, seeing growth, seeing people come to faith. But I think in the role that I'm doing, I've kind of quickly realized that there's a lot of diversity out there as well in Wales, that sometimes we talk about there are many Waleses in plural. So there's a richness, there's a diversity, from kind of the hospitality that you find in mid Wales to the rich faithfulness of God's people, their prayerfulness. So there's a lot of strength out there, but they're not all looking like suburban city churches. Some of them are very small. Some of them don't meet every week. But in terms of community, they're really, really close. But the truth is, a lot of them are struggling, and that's probably a common theme. A number of our churches are quite small. That's a feature of kind of population movement, of church decline that we're seeing generally, kind of in Western Europe. So that kind of stuff all impacts church life that we see. Having said all of that, there's some really good, exciting green shoots, and you know, with change, kind of there's some real willingness to do something innovative and create. So that's really producing some good thinking in terms of mission at the moment.
Okay, so what are some of those grassroots? Can you give us some examples of what you're seeing?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a few examples. I think clearly the kind of the crisis that we're in at the moment has really given churches a gift to experiment and try something new and different, and that's great. But I think some of the ones that we've kind of been working with, there's the situation where there's been kind of no ministry, and we're trying to move people into a context strategically. So I can think of Welshpool at the moment, where we've got a pastor and his family just moved into a church there after not having a pastor for a while, and just bringing those elements together, the right person in the right context for a strategic market town in mid Wales. You know, we know that God's in that, and He's going to bless that church. We don't get a lot of pastors asking us or saying to us, "I'm called to mid Wales," and when you do, you kind of think, "Wow, you know, we really want to put you in the right place and bless you and release you as much as we can in that." Others are working through kind of what does church look like in a new context. So I can think of one of our pastors who's kind of joint SWBA project as well in Tontaeg in Church Village, John Birch. And John and his wife Emma and his family are partnering with Rosa, who many will know from the college, but are also trying to set up a missional community. as an experiment, and the UW have tried providing some funding for a house so that they can purchase a house there in that area, and then work out what it means to be a missional community and be a blessing to the neighbourhood around them. That's an ongoing project, and we're excited about that one. Many will have heard about Hengoed and stuff that Kath and Carl Miller have been doing near Ystrad Mynach, and where they came to us a number of years ago and said, hey, there's a really old chapel in our community. The kids and the youth in the community are just hanging around it, doing up to no good, and we want to get involved with them. Can we just open the doors of the chapel? So she and Carl have been doing that for a number of years, and really have just seen a church grow and really get planted in that community, and kind of those young people taking on leadership of the church as well has been really interesting to see, and just responding to some of the social needs. So those are just some examples, and I guess we've got other churches that are doing that transition from kind of traditional to contemporary. I can think of one in Carnarvon in North Wales, which is entirely Welsh language, and they've kind of done that contemporary transition, which has really helped them to impact their community.
Brilliant, that's so good to hear. And what do you think are the challenges when you think of mission and Wales?
I think some of the challenges are that we are working in a context, and we have to be honest here, of decline. That's not always the predominant story, but it's definitely part of the context that we're in. And so some of our churches are struggling to manage change, and that capacity to change is a real challenge, particularly when you look at the demographic that can be sort of an aging congregation. And so some of our churches with older members are just struggling to keep up with kind of church life in general, let alone how to do imaginative and creative mission. And yet there's a faithfulness there, there's a prayerfulness there, and there's definitely a spirituality there. So we're looking to engage with that and build on that. I think many of our churches have kind of lived in a bit of a Christian bubble for a long time. And this crisis, we're hearing a little bit about how, well, we might be let out soon to live in our extended bubbles. Well, I think churches that have been beginning to thrive have been those that have really tried to burst their own sort of Christian bubble and get into their communities. And so those that have succeeded in doing that have found some harvest fields really to sow into and to reap there. I think massively we're going to be facing some of the social economic fallout from the current position that we're in, and when that starts cascading down into communities, there's a real challenge for our churches there too. I think we talk about food banks and street pastors and those things we're familiar with, but we perhaps are going to be finding more unemployment. We're hearing about some of the crises that health visitors and social workers and schools are going to be walking into when all this rise in domestic abuse or mental health, or the demand on food banks. That's going to be a massive challenge for our churches, and that's going to hit, I think, every part of Wales, not just cities. So that's going to be a challenge for us, how we respond to that as the people of God bringing good news.
What would you say has inspired you recently?
Wow, I wish I could say Joe Wicks. He's inspired me, but clearly not. And I guess I have to speak in the context that we're in, and it would be hard not to say some of those kind of frontline key workers that we're hearing stories about on the news, and in our own family, knowing some hospital chaplains and actually talking, particularly my brother-in-law, and actually it brings the situation really close to home and kind of the horrible reality of what they're dealing with. That's inspiring. But But just to lower the tone a bit, I guess I'm catching up on some films that I haven't seen and have been recommended to me. And I was watching the other day, I don't know whether you've seen it, Hacksaw Ridge. It's an old film, Hacksaw Ridge, bit of a war film, but it's based on the true story about a World War II conscientious, can I say that, conscientious objector. And he was a Seventh-day Adventist and a pacifist. But this film was all about how he signed up, he enlisted, despite everybody trying to say to him, you know, what's a pacifist wanting to do in the army? You shouldn't be here, get out. And they tried to get rid of him, but he refused to go, refused to bear arms, refused to fire a gun. But he said, I'm going to be a medic. Kind of the story, just this true story, tells about a guy who kind of risked his life time and again whilst remaining true to his Christian convictions. And he rescued loads of dying men from the battlefield. And the whole Hacksaw Ridge thing is this huge cliff face that he was just fetching wounded soldiers and rescuing them, and actually sharing his faith in deed more than just preaching it. And I thought it was interesting in our current climate, kind of how he rushed into battle, got in there, and really made his faith count in the most horrendous of situations. Got a medal at the end of it, awarded by I think it was Harry Truman, the old American president, because right at the end they cut to the original footage, which is always great, isn't it, when you see the real life. So for a few more Christian heroes like Desmond Doss, that would be awesome, and for me too.
That's brilliant. And as your role is with Mission, and I know you're starting to work with Forge Network. Can you tell us a little bit about that, how that came about, and what are your hopes and desires for that network and partnership?
Yeah, thanks, Hayley. I think one of the things I realised over these last few years is some of our churches, we say to them, you've got to do mission, you've got to do mission. And that word gets a little bit overused, if you can overuse the missional word. But what we were finding was actually people lacked the tools or the ability to think about, well, actually, what might mission look like in my context? Sometimes we hear back, well, I've tried this and I've tried that and I've done that. I've followed that plan. I've been a seeker-sensitive, alpha-serving, cell-based church and all of that, and it hasn't worked. And I think one of the things that appealed to us from the Forge network was really helping you to think contextually about what does mission look like in your situation, in your context. Particularly in this kind of post-Christian, I think many of us were trying to do mission in a Christian-based model, but actually when 97%, 95% of people in Wales don't go to church, how do you share a story that they've never heard, that they've got no narrative for? And so Forge is kind of helping us to think through that. It's for churches that are really interested in engaging in that. We're not pretending that everyone's going to sign up to it or make this journey. But for those that do, we want to engage in a really serious missional conversation about what does it look like for you as a community of believers to be embedded in your community, not just to meet for an hour on Sunday, but to actually be in the neighborhood, to offer hospitality, to find ways of sharing the hope that Jesus brings. And that's what we'd love to see come out of these conversations. So we're working with a guy called Cam Roxburgh from Vancouver, Canada. He's done a lot of this stuff, particularly working with denominations, with movements, and just provoking the questions really, and helping us to find the answers in our own context. So that's a long answer, but that's kind of stuff that we're hoping to do with Forge.
Brilliant, brilliant. And if you could go back at the start of your ministry, I know it's quite a few years now.
Hey, you don't need to be rude now, hey? You don't get a face like this.
If you could go back to the start of your ministry and give yourself one bit of advice in retrospect, what would it be?
That's a great question, isn't it? I think one of the things that I've been learning recently, and it reflects on kind of over 20 years in the local church, is that I might want to go back and spend more time really focusing on what God is doing and joining him in that, rather than, I think there were times when I was trying to drag God into what I was doing and asking him to bless that agenda. And I think actually just taking a bit of time to discern what God is doing recently, and it's been so much easier. Things open up, and you just step back and say, wow, I couldn't have done that. That's what God is doing. And almost just being in that moment and in that space where God is at work. So I think that's one of the things that a younger me I'd like to have done more of. And I think if I was allowed one other, I think I'd really like to focus more on making disciples, not just converts. I think there was a time when we were just keen on winning people to Christ, and as important that is, but actually really embedding that model of discipleship in people. Too many people relied on the pastor, the minister, to live out their faith through, and I think that's not very healthy. So when the pastor goes, that's kind of a bit weird for church, and we're finding that now, aren't we? What does it look like for people in their homes to read their Bible in the morning without having a pastor pop up on Facebook and doing it for you? What does it mean for me to walk with Jesus every day? So that's a challenge, and a good one for me to have learned years ago would have been really helpful.
And as you say, you've been in Wales for a long time now. And Wales, I'm discovering, has got such a rich history, hasn't it? And there are loads of churches everywhere. And when you look into their history, they were founded on this radical missional edge of people passionate about Jesus and wanting others to know him and serve that community. What do you think are the challenges then in the church that we have in Wales today of a disconnect with that original DNA?
Well, there's you couldn't really answer that question without mentioning our sense of tradition and traditionalism in Wales. There's plenty of jokes about, this is the chapel I go to and this is the chapel I don't go to, and we're very good at defining our boundaries and our borders in Wales. You don't go far in Wales without having a conversation before you try to work out, well, where are you from? Who are you related to? And, do I know someone that you know? So there's that aspect of connectedness. But actually in our chapel life, or our church life, we actually work quite independently. And our independence can be a bit of a hindrance to our sense of mission. Particularly as denominations kind of are reaching kind of a time in their own history where they're not as strong as they used to be. They're not as relevant as they could be. There's a real opportunity to rethink, what does it mean to be the people of God that maybe aren't capital B Baptist or Presbyterian or Congregationalist or Anglican? What does it mean to be Jesus people in Wales today? And finding that commonality, I think, could be a massive step forward for us. You mentioned history there. I think you don't go far without looking back and actually just remembering where we've come from. And our Baptist forefathers in Wales, they were radical, they were dissenters, they were people that sometimes had to hide when they worshipped because of fear of persecution. They were creative, imaginative, and actually they came to a point where they actually found they couldn't do without each other, and that's where associating came from. And they began to network with each other, and those networks were living networks. They weren't boring committee meetings. And I think there's something there to recapture our interdependency, and how in Wales we could do this together rather than apart. And I'd love to see a little bit more of that taking place as well.
That's brilliant. So how can we, as an association and as churches, support and pray for you?
Thank you. Yeah. Well, we'd love you to pray. We're in a year of prayer at the moment as a union, and we're encouraging. And this was conceived last year, thinking about 2020. So we're trying to put prayer front and forward in our churches at the moment. And I'm kind of conscious that we're between Easter and Pentecost. And one of the things we're asking churches to pray for at the moment is pray for a new move of the Holy Spirit. And so you could pray for us for that God would do what only God can do. Because when we try, it can be like pushing water uphill. But when God moves, and he has moved in Wales, not just in 1904, but before that as well. He was at work before 1904. Let's remember that we need his Holy Spirit to move amongst us. So we need that more than anything, and pray for me to be open to the move of God's Spirit. But for our churches, I think in this season, I'd love us to be praying for that freedom to experiment and be creative, that freedom to depend on God, and maybe pray that we'd have the courage to let go of some stuff. My biggest fear is that we're going to be a bit like a piece of elastic at the end of all this, and we're being stretched, but we'll just ping back to our original form, and we'll go back to what we always did. I'm hoping that we can really learn to be something different and take something that we've tried into a new season with God. And for me personally, I just pray that God will give us the discernment to offer wise leadership at the moment to our pastors, and that we'd be really supportive to them as well. It can be really easy to be quite judgmental and cynical, and I'd hate for that to be the dominant message through conversations that I'm having with folks. Save me from cynicism, Lord, because I want to be a positive influence on all that's happening.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for all you shared and your time, and we'll be praying for you and believing together for another outpouring, even greater than before, of God's Spirit across Wales. Thank you.
Thank you, Hayley. Great to chat to you.